right. With that, we go to our next panel, and I want to introduce our host for this exciting panel discussion. So our host is Amy Lewin. She is deputy editor of Sifted, the media platform for Europe startups backed by Financial Times. She reports on topics from investments to mobility to diversity and tech. It runs Sifted newsletter and regularly moderates events across the continent, right now, unfortunately, remotely. So she will explore with her panelists collaboration post-COVID and how tech ecosystems can work together in the future. Thanks so much for being with us.
I think you just had Reshma on screen, who I'll introduce in a second. Yes. She's one of my wonderful panelists. So just to introduce the panel, so I have, we'll go with Reshma first, seeing as she already stole the stage. Reshma Sohoni, who's managing partner at SeedCamp, the European seed fund, which she co-founded in 2007, which has a pretty impressive portfolio of many European companies, including 3 unicorns, TransferWise, Revolut, and UiPath. But we'll be discussing whether actually having unicorns is what you should be aiming for these days. Anyway, later on in the panel, I also have Irina Haivas, who's a partner at VC firm Atomico, who sits on the board of lots of health tech companies. So she can be telling us about what role health tech companies are going to play in getting us out of the state we're in. She's also a former surgeon. So she kind of actually knows what she's talking about when it comes to medicine. I also have Albert Wenger, who's the managing partner at Union Square Ventures across the pond. But he hasn't always sat on the VC side. He's also co-founded several companies and is an angel investor in Etsy and Tumblr. And finally, I have Constantin van Orange, who leads Technique Leap Netherlands, the accelerator for the tech ecosystem in the Netherlands. And he is on a mission to turn the Netherlands into a unicorn nation, apparently. So we'll be finding out why he's that bothered about those unicorns. So hello, everyone on the panel. Obviously, the title is Collaborating Post-COVID, How Can Tech Ecosystems Work Together in the Future? So let's start by talking about collaboration. You know, how have we seen startups or ecosystems, by which I'm imagining we mean cities or, you know, different communities around the place, how have people kind of come together while being more apart than ever before? Who wants to take that one first?
I mean, I guess we were obviously backstage talking about vaccines, right? So we're jumping in the deep end here. But, you know, as much as the spread of this virus it's been global and it was very fast. And we were just talking about kind of technology's role in countering that. And a great example is scientists being able to work completely across borders globally, collaboration software like Zoom, Hopin, which we're on here as well. Lots of medical conferences going on Hopin, for example. Just sharing data, getting access to data. Again, having where you can get tested. Having those mechanisms in place and getting that data all digitized quickly. I mean, that's the power of these ecosystems and being so connected in what is just a very remote world right now.
Yeah, in response to when the crisis hit, so we really support entrepreneurs in all different kinds of ways, and we had to shift towards immediate financial support. And what was interesting to see is that we could easily connect, for instance, with what they were doing in France, what they were doing in the UK, also in Germany, to compare notes and who was doing what for their community, with who they were working with, finance ministries, where to get funding. So there is a growing kind of sense of that this is a tech community coming together with a similar set of issues and also a similar set of solutions. And the crisis really brought that out to bear. And it's not, you would sometimes think there's a lot of competition between ecosystems. Actually, it was surprising that there was a lot of collaboration there, and we were helping each other by comparing notes, but also kind of holding that up against our governments, saying, look what the French are doing. They're putting many more billions in there than we are, and they were pointing at us. So we were doing so. We were really trying to help the tech entrepreneurs by also kind of supporting each other and pressuring our governments with using each other's data.
I think that's a really interesting point. We at Sifted, we wrote an article that was kind of comparing all the different tech, or it was listing all the different tech measures. And I did have people emailing me from all different, the kind of equivalent bodies from different companies emailing me saying kind of like, what is that country doing for talent? And oh, our government hasn't yet done that thing. That would be really good. Irina, if you were going to award a prize to a European nation for the best startup support during COVID, who do you reckon would win? You've got a portfolio all over the place.
Actually, I don't want to favor anyone here. I think everyone has done actually quite a good job and moved very fast. In our portfolio, actually, none of our companies ended up taking, or very few ended up taking advantage of that scheme. But I know other, in the UK in particular, but I know other companies have done so. I think France has done pretty significant commitment for the tech ecosystem, but also other industries to incorporate tech, and obviously Germany as well. But I mean, there's also been efforts at smaller ecosystem levels. So I think it's hard to say, and the results of these things take long to pan out. And the deployment and allocation of this capital, also matters. It's not just about have you done this program, but also like have you allocated it to the right companies that then go on and survive and become champions.
As far as the deployment of capital goes, I think one really interesting outcome, I believe, from this that will be very beneficial to smaller ecosystems is that investors are doing deals remotely. So when I started in this industry, on the entrepreneurial side, it was the mid-90s when Silicon Valley firms would only invest in deals that they were within half an hour of their office, basically. That started to change maybe a decade ago or so. Silicon Valley firms started doing deals in New York, for example. Then they set off offshoots in, let's say India, for instance, Sequoia, India. But we haven't stopped. I don't think anybody has stopped. They've always been doing new deals. We've been doing them by meeting teams remotely. And so we're all looking at each other going like, well, if we can do this, we can do a deal in Australia. And so I do think this will be very beneficial to areas that traditionally had more difficult access to capital as a result.
I think that's a great point. Yeah. No, I just wanted to share some stats. We've done 20 investments since March. So, it's all remote, right? And one of the things I do find is, we've done, and we're doing them at that kind of 150K, 500K check level. And what I think we've also seen is our companies that we invested in 2018, 2019 have gone on to raise during this time as well. And I think there's a lot of leaning in on from investors further downstream from us to say, okay, who's been there before? Who have we met? And it's, Seed Camp, we've met the Seed Camp team and their investors in so-and-so company. And so I think there is some of that kind of validation that is, those still important of, we're meeting this team completely remotely, but what can we lean on? Because obviously there's some bad stories out there as well. So yeah, it's been interesting to watch how much more kind of due diligence is being done with our support into some of these remote investments.
I was going to say sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that just picking up on Albert's point, another thing that we've seen is the impact on sales. So now, before you used to have to fly or have some geographical proximity. But now the expectation isn't there that you have to be in person. So you can do remote sales without having to open an office in the US, for instance, if you're a European company, especially if you're from a smaller ecosystem. So I think that dynamic is also quite an important one. And the crisis, if it lasts long enough, behaviors become the new norm and they stick, right?
How would you advise if you're a company anywhere in the world, how do you reach you now? Normally you would go, you do visits, or you have tech events. These are all gone now, and everything comes through the same stupid channel, only through the screen, and all that information. So how do you sift through all of the requests, and how do you, if it's a very relational business as well, so how do you maintain those relations, and how do you give people access, or companies access to you from new markets, like was suggested now by Albert?
My Twitter DMs are open, so.
I think actually we haven't found it as challenging in practice in terms of, as I was referring, I think if anybody watched Johnny yesterday from Hopin, this interview, he said, the future is hybrid. And I think our view has been, that's been the future for a while, especially I think if you cover all of Europe, you're not going to open an office in every single geography. So, and we never insisted our companies to ever move to London or the UK in the last decade plus. So we've actually had to build a pretty hybrid offering. And so, of course, if you can come through London sort of a few times a year, it is ideal. You meet many more people in person, but combining online, offline, I mean, we've been able to offer quite a lot for, even drinks. Like Hopin has this feature, we call it Russian roulette with clothes on, or chat roulette.
Full disclosure here, are you an investor in Hopin?
I'm an investor. Chat roulette with clothes on, and it's a fun feature. We did our founder drinks on there, and amazingly in London, obviously only like 15 people can come. Doing on this feature, we had someone dialing in from Vietnam at like 3 a.m, but, and with a beer in their hand. I mean, so we've seen a lot of positives, even on our investment forum, where LPs are invited to come meet some of the companies we're looking at. Again, in London, we often have 30 people come, and now we have, folks dialing in from US and wherever, so sort of upwards of 50, 60 people dialing in. So, so you've seen a lot.
Riffing off that for a moment, when you remove the physical constraints, interesting things become possible. So, we have executive assistants, we have people on the network team, we have people who are not part of the investment team. In a normal pitch, it would have been impossible to have them be in the room, because who are these people who are just sort of kind of there? But remotely, it's okay. It's just another little square on the screen, and when somebody's speaking, they're front and center. And so, we've let anybody in the firm now participate in pitches just to listen in. It's been great. So I do think that when this is all over, we will return to some amount of in-person activity. But I really think the new normal will be set at a completely different level from where it was before.
Do you think the competition for VCs is stronger now or greater? Because
well, this
VCs
is a question.
Can be, anywhere.
Yeah, it definitely is. But I think it's also a little bit of a question by sector. So if you have a software company or a SaaS company today, there are thousands of funds in the world you can pitch. If you have a hard tech company or a climate company, the list is much shorter. So there's sectors that are, I believe, over-allocated to by venture capital, and then there's sectors that I believe are under-allocated. So this is still, how competitive the markets are is still quite largely a function of what kind of thing you're building.
Do you think this is going to accelerate then the move to VCs specializing, basically, which has obviously happened a lot more in the US today, and we've started to see a lot more of that happening in Europe, but we do still have a lot of very generalist funds, some of which have been around forever, like SeedCab, and some of them, are quite new. Do you think those ones will struggle to raise capital from LPs? Will people be looking for the super niche, we know how to do one thing really well?
Yeah, I guess largely I think that returns are going to suffer in areas that have too much capital, and returns are going to be very good in areas that don't have enough capital.
But I think it's an interesting point. I mean, we were just raising our fund through this literally since March and our closing, and we were asked sort of, okay, what do you do now that Seedcamp's meant to be going out there, right? You're supposed to travel, you're supposed to be out there. And I said, actually, to your point, Amy, I think the newer funds have a bit of a challenge in that these events aren't happening. So that serendipity, that ability to showcase your brand, extend your brand, is harder. Whereas for us, we are just known out there, and so there's so much coming our way, and even from LP interest, we're super oversubscribed because it's sort of a haven of growth, and a known haven of growth. So therefore, that means if those young new funds and young new managers, I do think there's a point around how do you differentiate? And so, whether that is specialization or something else that you can bring to the table and create that brand communication and brand knowledge around, because it is tough. If you are a first time fund out there, besides Sifted covering you or, TechCrunch or whatnot, how do you get out there? Because the serendipity aspect, these dinners that happen at events, it's just, it is tougher.
But from your side, are you investing more than in quantitative tools versus referral based? I mean, how are you scanning the market?
Go on, Irina.
Well, I think everyone talks about the promise of data-driven kind of sourcing, and that's definitely something that's picking up, and we're doing more of that, but that's not the only channel. Like at some point you do still need a human in the loop to curate that, and then there's the usual challenge. I mean, in our case, because we are slightly later stages and we're Series A, we work with funds like SeedCam. That's kind of one of our channels, in addition to like our data driven, which is more relationship driven and kind of more network driven. And then we have the data-driven channels as well. And then we are actually trying to make an active effort to go out of our common channels, because if we are to encourage diversity, and by diversity, I mean a very broad definition of it, not just gender, but socioeconomic, countries, everything, then we kind of need to like allow other people to enter this small world of VCs. Maybe that people that don't have warm intros, people that may not be on like our regular data sources. So we're trying to make a proactive effort there. But I would say it's still very much a mix between the humans and the some of the kind of technology, yes, as you see everywhere.
And our process has always been at USV to be very public about the kind of things we're interested in and we want to invest in. And so, we will be tweeting, we'll be blogging, we'll be speaking about things that are of interest to us. And that usually shakes loose people who are like, that's the exact thing I'm working on, But I do think Irina is right. One of the things we are trying to be more proactive about is getting that content out to people who might not normally see it. And so we're working on what are the right sort of amplification mechanisms, what are the right networks that we're not connected to today that we need to be connected to.
What have you figured out so far? Albert, what have you figured out so far? What's working?
Well, I think what's working is you need to connect people who are part of those networks, and you need to make a proactive effort to find them. And there are networks of different entrepreneurs, both by geography, by race, by gender, and you need to be connected to them so that they can, share this with their community.
And if this is, if we look back on this era in 10 years' time, and hopefully there's a vaccine and there's no other pandemics going on, what kind of technology, and let's not just say like Zoom or video calls or virtual conferences, what are going to be some of the kind of defining things that you think started now or really took off, in the same way that perhaps we've had a kind of a real buzz around fintechs, for example, in Europe for a while? What other kind of communities are going to start growing and really interesting things are going to happen in this like hybrid world?
Well, I would maybe hasten to say that outside of the pandemic crisis, there's a huge other crisis unfolding, which is the climate crisis. And that has been unrelenting, and that certainly hasn't stopped because of COVID. 2020 is on its way to be the hottest year on record. We're seeing 120-degree temperature, that's Fahrenheit, in Los Angeles. It's never happened before. We're seeing major storm events. It's the busiest hurricane season on record in the Atlantic. That's only going to go one direction. So I believe we will see, and we are seeing to a degree, like if you look at Tesla's growth, we will see, broadly speaking, climate technology to be one of the most important technologies over the coming decades.
Yeah, I mean that also links with food production. I mean it's very broad, right? It's the way we work, the way we commute. It's the energy system, but also massive investments required, right? We talk a lot about hydrogen and all that, but you need the investments in the infrastructure as well.
On that point about collaboration, perhaps, do you think, especially when we start getting into things like transport or education or health, things that, you know, have traditionally been very public sector, not just private, are we going to need to see more collaboration between, you know, public funders? I know the European Investment Fund is like the biggest investor in European VC funds, but do you think we're going to need to see more of that, more different kind of models to tackle some of these really like complicated and enormous and highly regulated often sectors to kind of bring them into the future?
Well, the collaborations, sorry, go ahead.
No, and I don't think that's necessarily new. I mean, I think if you think of the birth of internet and, a lot of particularly American institutions were deeply, and UK, right, were deeply involved in that. And it was a lot of collaboration, public and private. So I think in that middle part, we've definitely, a lot of the spotlight's been on private capital, but the public money's always been involved, public support. And I think there's also like push and pull. Like I know with, our sizes of checks, we can't really invest in hardware in any meaningful way, and Atomico can, right? But we can invest a lot in software and things. We're investing in things that are potentially early too, but it starts to push right back deeper into what are some of the deeper changes that can happen. So I think there's a role to for both to play, is like the small capital like us and the large and the public folks as well.
It's not all about money, right? I mean, it's about government wanting to really transform education. It's not about just being remote. It's about how do you apply new technologies, there's so much content out there in education, but also in healthcare. We've had healthcare solutions, remote telemedicine, all that for 20 years. But it's really about how the system will integrate that, how the funding mechanisms work. Certification, regulation, all that kind of stuff. So it also depends on, so if you're talking about collaboration, it's really about how do governments collaborate with the market players, but doing their thing. So it's in energy, it's about infrastructure, it's about taxation, it's about accelerating that transition, more than just the funding part. And I think there the governments are really, I think, leaving the opportunity on the table, because COVID has been an accelerator for many of those trends that have been waiting to explode, basically. But it does require that government act on that urgency, and we're seeing that there's a bit of a retraction again. Whereas I think a month ago everybody would agree that education will be fundamentally changed, and healthcare, and that we were now accelerating on the green transition. There's the food transition as well, the way we produce food and consume and deliver it as well. But then, if the urgency drops, the willingness to make political sacrifices there or harder choices might also be a bit less urgent.
Karina, how does it? I was going to ask how it is from your perspective on the healthcare side of things, where we've obviously seen a dramatic move to digital that seemed impossible, but is that going to stay? Have we kind of learned anything actually?
I mean, that's the billion-dollar question, right? In some ways, I think the one thing that, just to kind of follow up from Konstantin's point, is there's a difference between allocating just like some lump sums for a certain period of time. Like, there you go, you're being paid by the government through a central contract or something for 1 year for this particular digital health service, and translating that into ongoing like license like revenue. And I think governments tend to do the former, saying, oh, here you go, we're allocating 20 million awards to this company, 10 whatever, but that doesn't always like kind of stick and translate into that. So I think it's still on the company to do the work. Well, first to build a product that users love, but then to still navigate the healthcare system. So I think in terms of behaviors, I kind of subscribe to this hybrid world, right? Like it's not like all doctors are going to move to fully remote consultations, but now it's possible. Now they have the tools, they started using them, and they don't want to give them away. So they will pressure a bit the system to kind of fund those tools. I think that the challenge in Europe is that if you are a doctor's practice, you belong to a national healthcare system, and so the user and the payer are not the same. While if you look in systems like the US, your user will pay. The budget holder is not the user, and so you still, I think there's still very many challenges like they were before in navigating and scaling health tech companies, and the fact that there's some favorable trends now and kind of an awareness is great, and there's tailwinds to take advantage of, but it's not like this is going to solve all the other go-to-market issues in healthcare. Like it remains really hard to go to market. It's a good change, it's a good awakening, but it's not, from tomorrow we can all scale all our companies because all the governments are giving us money and licenses for next 10 years.
Yeah, it certainly in areas that require, operating under a regulated regime, that's the case. But I think in education, I believe the existing institutions were moribund for quite some time. And it's a little bit like Wile E. Coyote having run over the cliff, but having a lot of inertia and staying in the air until he looks down and sees that there's no more ground. I think education is having its looking down and seeing there's no ground moment. So my wife and I homeschooled our children for many, many years, all the way up to college, basically. And at the time, that was a very unusual thing. People said, why were you doing this and so forth? And we said that the existing school system as it stands today is an industrial age institution. I think a lot of people are finding out now just what the primary function of the school system is, which is babysitting. And so I do think that this, again, it doesn't mean that everybody will be a homeschooler overnight, although people have been forced to be homeschoolers overnight. But it has shown how much of what we take for granted, how much of what we think has to be this way because it's been this way, does in fact not have to be that way at all.
Again, but I mean, the homeschool thing is a really interesting one. Massive challenges there, right? Because a lot of kids will get left behind. I mean, again, we were in a very fortunate situation when our kids, with the obviously with distance learning, but then you hear about the stats of kids without home internet, right? They literally can't. I mean, so you have that issue, right? So I agree that I think for a lot of fortunate households, it's come out that school looks a lot like babysitting, but for a lot more households, it came out that that's the only place they can get a meal. That's the only place they can get access to technology or any kind of schooling. So
yeah, I'm not disagreeing with that. I just think those are problems that we need to solve in any case, right? I mean, we need to make sure people can feed themselves, and I think overloading the school system is basically being, which we do in New York City, like a way of feeding 25,000 homeless children is just a bad strategy to begin with. So I understand that it's difficult. I'm just saying I think we shouldn't use that difficulty as a way of saying this is why everybody needs to be in school.
No, and I think
I'll give you a good example. Sorry, we've got our dog barking in the background. Apologies for that, but Susan and I are very active in the small town called Hudson in upstate New York because we're building a learning center there, and we discovered that 50 families didn't have internet access. And these days, it's very quickly solved. We just got them Android phones, and they can use them as a hotspot. So I think that connectivity is something we need to solve for the public, period. And again, it shouldn't be like, school is where you go so you get connectivity. Everybody should have connectivity in their home. It's sort of a fundamental right that people should have.
Has it made you, as investors, focus more on the kind of just how broad a range of customers a product has? So, okay, this is an education app, but is it really only for people who can afford to pay for education, or is this only really for, like, you know, middle class parents who are tutoring their kids? Or has it at all changed your thinking on that, or is it something you're more conscious about when you're meeting companies?
Well, our current investment thesis is that we invest in companies and projects that broaden access to knowledge, capital, and well-being. And so it's explicitly written into our investment thesis that we're looking for things that broaden access. So we're not looking for somebody building a learning solution that only the top 5% of the population can afford. And if you think about some of the investments we've made, like, you know, companies like Duolingo, for example, you can learn for free. You know, anybody can learn a language for free. And then, of course, there's paid modalities as well. But we believe the thrust of a lot of these things, healthcare too. You know, if you, again, one of our portfolio companies, Neurix, for example, you know, you can get a prescription, often you can get a prescription filled for less than the price of what the copay would have been when you go visit your regular doctor. So we think that the thrust of these technologies is to make things vastly more affordable for a vastly greater number of people than ever before.
Isn't it also an issue that was already there when talking about gender diversity, for instance, where whole sectors were not invested in because there was much more investment in male-led teams or even male-dominated teams? So we knew about this. I don't know if COVID has changed much about that, but it's been an issue for quite a while that ignoring certain demographies that actually are setting up and running companies is also means that you're leaving a lot of market potential on the table.
Do you think VCs are changing fast enough? I know Atomico has announced a lot of kind of new diversity policies. There are a lot of kind of internships and programs out there to work with kind of different forms of diversity in tech communities and bring people who aren't the usual VC profile into VC. But personally, I still think the conversation sort of goes as far as gender, which like is kind of crazy. There's a whole lot more types of diversity out there. And if really VCs think that adding a woman to the team is like we've ticked a massive box, like we've got a long, long way to go.
But long ways take little steps. So I mean, one doesn't exclude the other, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I always say, like, let's make sure we keep, let's make sure, Amy, you keep asking that question, right? And we keep pushing. And I think Diversity VC, which is, pulled together several VC firms. And again, there too, I know on the conversations we have, we're looking at each other too, is like, they've got, where are they looking and where are they getting talent from and what are those sources we can tap into? So I think there's that peer pressure in a good way, actually, as you said, to tick the box beyond women. I'm actually on a push now to get men back involved.
We have too many women on our team too.
Yeah, exactly.
I think though there's you can talk to VC industries or the founders to different topics. I think it's easy to hire women at let's say mid-level or junior level. I think what's hard is to create to make sure you proactively create an environment which understands how they're different, which in every single small interactions understands there may be stylistic differences in like how women present themselves versus men, or they may be things that they feel comfortable about that men don't. And I'm using women for like a broader like diversity concern, but it's not just about hiring. It's a lot about retaining, and I think that still needs to be proven because at more senior level, the air is still quite thin to some extent. And then I think on the founder side, I don't think we feel we're there at all or we're doing enough. I think we are trying a lot of things, and we definitely don't look only at gender diversity. We are very proactively kind of looking at it. Sometimes it's hard to assess things like socioeconomic one because people may not want to disclose that. but there are some we can pick up on, and we always have that as a consideration when we make an investment. And we also have a diversity and inclusion clause actually in our term sheet, requiring the company to put in place in the first 3 to 6 months after our investment ECG policy and diversity and inclusion policy with clear steps. And we've seen in most of the companies we invested in that started at low kind of diversity number, move up. And it's always the same story, right? You need to do it early, because if you do it too late, then a lot of women will be like, well, I don't want to be the only woman there. And you need to hire relatively senior early so that they can kind of hire themselves. And it's very doable if you kind of know some of the simple things to consider. But is it enough? Of course not. And especially on other areas of diversity is not enough.
I think we've only got a few minutes left, so I realised that I dropped a lot of hints that we were going to talk about unicorns. So let's just quickly...
Thank God we did not.
Let's quickly just talk about that. Do we really need them? Do we really need to focus on them? Can we just get rid of the stupid term? What's going on there? And then we'll call it a day.
It would really take our PR away. What? We need something to hang on to. No, look, I think it's been so interesting to watch the rush to IPO, right, or the flood to IPO, and in that comes some level of discipline. I think, at least mostly, and so we're certainly focused on our companies beyond revenue, how are they sustainable businesses, profitable, and so profitability as a long-term, mid to long-term goal is certainly important. So yes, it's not just about raise X at X, Y valuation. Okay, you're a unicorn. The fundamentals, beneath that, it does make for a good headline, but the fundamentals are something kind of VCs across the value chain are certainly paying close attention to.
Yeah. Trust the Americans; they will always find another kind of nice term. So suddenly unicorn came up, and there'll be something else. I think the point is that you want the world to understand that these companies are funded by VC funds that are focused on growth, and then the rest is kind of more detail about are you funding market share, or are you funding based on the fundamentals, but the idea is really that these companies can actually grow that fast. And I mean, in a country like the Netherlands, this is actually one of the challenges, is that you want people to think, entrepreneurs to think bigger. They shouldn't just think about servicing the domestic market, because we only have 17 million customers. You want them to think global immediately. And the image of the unicorn, at least, is something, also because there are quite a number of entrepreneurs actually achieving that also in the Netherlands. So it's a role model, shows that, if you want to found a global company, you can do it from anywhere, and as long as you have a real ambitious plan, you have obviously a good product, but also you raise internationally, then it's possible. So for us, the unicorn therefore is a useful kind of unifying image of a company that wants to grow fast, has ambition to be an international player, and positions itself that way.
Okay, great. We won't kill off the unicorns just yet, then.
Not that many around, so.
But it would be nice if they looked a little bit different, or the people at the top did, than the ones at the moment. I think that's all we have time for, but thank you, everyone. That has been a super interesting and wide-ranging conversation, so thank you very much.
I think we would love to have one audience question, since there's a lot of questions there. So if you have time, we would have time for answering one of the audience questions. So we have a question from Stefan Zuhani, who was very curious about if you think this wave of digitization at a government level is going to allow them to refocus their resources now to more important things. So do you think there's a positive from this wave of digitalization and being able to invest in other areas? And if so, what would these areas be? if any of you have a perspective from a VC side.
It's a very
all right. It looks like
I guess I'll go for it because I mean it's a very broad question. Let me I guess take it from UK standpoint. Is I see it a lot on sort of some of the government contracts. One of our companies, Stodels, helps companies win those, and bit in health tech as well. So I think short answer, yes. I mean, I think, everything kind of moving towards more digitization does tend to generally bring efficiency, cost efficiency as well. So frees up resources. Now goes back to that pointer of you will have folks left behind. And so I think if, government doesn't overlook that and ensures, again, they're working hand in hand with the private sector to bring those that are potentially left behind in a bigger policy way, that's crucial. But yes, I mean, I think there's just so much efficiency gains that it frees up time, resources, money.
History tells you that governments, and they invest in IT, it mostly is a cost, and it doesn't lead to the efficiencies that they expect. So I wouldn't get my hopes up too high that it will lead to massive cost savings. But maybe if you apply more tech from the market, actually helping governments to do this well, then and maybe COVID in some countries has led to closer collaborations between government and the private sector and tech sector, for instance, in the development of these track and trace apps, etc. Then those collaborations might actually yield more effective government digital solutions. But on the history so far has not been really on the positive end of this conversation, sadly.
Well, I hope, as we are all optimists, that this time it ends better than in the past. Anyway, I want to thank all of you. Amy, thank you so much for moderating and hosting this. Konstantin, Reshma, Albert, and Irina, thank you for being our guest virtually today. We hope to host you next year all in person in beautiful Cluj-Napoca. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.